Hi, I'm Mike, this is Ben, and due to a transmutation accident, we've accidentally switched beards. Welcome to Rocks Fall, Everyone Dies.
Let's face it, every D&D monster under the sun is out to kill you. Some of them are just better at it than others. Getting a good understanding of a roaming monster's lethality is often the only thing that separates a good adventurer from a dead one.
Of course, it's easy to tell a flump from a mind flayer, but what do your dungeoneering instincts tell you about a boulette compared to a roper, or a pit fiend compared to an archon? To make it easy for you, we've compiled a list of the most dangerous monsters you don't want to encounter on your next dungeon dive.
Remember that this list is just our opinions and doesn't constitute actual fact.
That being said, our opinions are always right and always constitute actual fact. Here we go.
Number 9. The Desalle Wagon.
First on the list is the Desalle Wagon, one of the de facto monsters for any pirate campaign. These scaly, fish-like monsters might look like throwaway mooks, and they mostly are. But when you take a closer look at their stats, you'll notice they're perfectly geared to murder you.
Desalle Wagons have the Blood Frenzy feature, which means they have advantage on any attack they make against a target that's taken any damage. Worse still, each of them gets extra attack, and they're low enough CR that they'll probably be thrown around in groups.
What you get is a bunch of mooks that shouldn't be underestimated. A dangerous fight that can turn lethal in a moment's notice. Even party members with high AC are likely to get beaten up, and crits are almost guaranteed. Hope you brought some potions of healing.
Number 8. Black Pudding.
Next up is the Black Pudding. This monster isn't incredibly deadly on its own, but it can make your dungeon crawl hell if you run into it early on. Its corrosive form feature permanently damages your weapons every time you attack it, and its pseudopod does the same to your armor.
If that wasn't enough, attacking it with a slashing weapon causes it to divide into 2 slimes, which means twice as many puddings wearing down your gear. If the dumb party barbarian doesn't catch on, you might get swamped with slimes and come out of the fight without weapons or armor to speak of. Easy prey for the next wandering monster. Number 7. The Invisible Stalker.
The Invisible Stalker is exactly what it says on the box. Completely invisible. It's not magically invisible, you can't dispel it, it's just invisible. So we're talking free advantage on all of its attacks and disadvantage on all of yours.
More than that, the Invisible Stalker is resistant to physical damage, so even if you land a hit, if you're not using a magical weapon, it's unlikely to matter. Your best bet is to stand back, take a careful guess at where it is, and bombard it with AoE spells.
But then again, that tactic basically makes the melee classes worthless, and only works as long as you have spell slots. Good luck if you have to fight an invisible stalker.
Number 6. The Rakshasa.
Despite what they might look like, the Rakshasa are not Khajiit from Skyrim. They are devil tigers from hell.
Rakshasa are flat out immune to spells of 6th level or lower, and have advantage on saving throws against the rest of them. They can go invisible, charm people, dominate people, and generally mess with people's minds.
In a fight, they're not much of a match for an angry, axe-wielding barbarian, but if your party has a lot of spellcasting, you might as well go home the second you see its furry face.
Plus, if you manage to corner a Rakshasa, it can fly or plane shift away whenever it wants. So on the off chance you're about to win, you're probably not going to win. Number 5. The Basilisk.
Another classic D&D monster, the Basilisk needs little introduction. This scaly jerk has a pretty high AC and turns people into stone with a glance. Not like temporarily or after half dozen saves, but after 2 turns. Boom, you are stone dead.
Of course, a single Basilisk is hardly going to score a kill against a high-level party, but what's really surprising here is its challenge rating. The Basilisk is only CR 3. If you fight this monster with a low-level party, you'll be struggling to make saves against petrification or to beat its armor class. In fact, you'll be lucky if someone doesn't retire a character before the combat is out. Number 4. The Intellect Devourer.
The Intellect Devourer might look like a brain with legs. Are you sure? Okay, it's literally just a brain with legs. But it's really dangerous, we swear.
This monster doesn't have a lot of hit points or particularly impressive AC, but if you fail a save against it, it'll simply reduce your intelligence score to 0, leaving you a drooling unconscious mess.
Then, all it has to do is... Really? That doesn't seem right. Literally eat your brain and teleport into your skull, working you like a grim puppet until someone drives it out or strikes down your animated body in a violent blow of mercy.
Oof. No. Any monster that could just outright kill you shouldn't be underestimated, especially when it's only CR2. A wise DM shouldn't throw these around willy-nilly like other low CR monsters, since if they do, they'll have a dead brain-eaten party on their hands. Number 3. The bowdak.
The bowdak isn't from the monster manual, but if your DM owns Volo's Guide to Monsters, be on the lookout for these ugly jerks.
Or don't be on the lookout, since if you look at a bowdak, you're probably gonna die. Whenever you're within range, you automatically take damage, and if you look at it, you have to make a saving throw to take yet more damage. And if you whiff that roll, you just drop to 0 hit points. Yay.
On the bright side, the bowdak takes damage from sunlight. Bright side? See what I did there?
I'm gonna have to find a pun jar for you to put money in.
Okay.
Number 2. An ancient red dragon.
Next on the list is the ancient red dragon. It's cliche, I know, but this dragon is absolutely a party killer. Most groups would rather square off against the Tarrasque than invade an ancient red dragon's lair, and for excellent reason.
For starters, their AC and hit points are really high, so fighting even a crippled red dragon is going to take some time. They're immune to fire damage as well, meaning all those fire spells you prepared are useless.
Fireball, firebolt, scorching ray. Gone. Next, their damage output is massive, with a whopping 26 d6 fire damage on their breath weapons, and a whole host of physical attacks at their disposal. Add on to that their legendary actions, frightful presence, and lair actions, and you have one hell of a fight on your hands.
Oof. And if the fight turns bad for it, it can just fly off and bombard you with fire breath from well out of your reach. This is definitely a monster for high-level parties, but even then, you're looking at an uphill battle. Number 1. The Flump. Last but not least, the most dangerous monster in all of D&D. The Flump. Just kidding, it's Mind Flayer.
One of my personal favorites and a D&D classic, the Mind Flayer has a deadly 1-2 punch. Its Mind Blast stuns every target in a 60-foot cone, leaving you and your allies completely helpless so it can saunter over at its leisure to eat your brain. It's massive damage with the potential for an instant kill.
Even without the brain eating, a 60-foot cone of stunning is nothing to sneeze at. Try assaulting a Mind Flayer colony, or even a small dinner party of Mind Flayers, and there's really a good chance that the entire party will be stunned into utter uselessness within the first round.
That's just the Mind Flayers, too! If you're going to be fighting Mind Flayers, chances you'll be squaring off against the even more powerful cousins, or the Big Daddy Elder Brain. On this episode of Mailbag of Holding, we're going to be discussing your comments on our last episode about how not to railroad as a DM. Multiplayer Madness had this to say: can you explain how to pull off a twist without it seeming like a railroad moment? And the example he gave was killing an NPC in front of the players. Now, the idea of having a twist in your campaign, like a really definitive twist, is something that comes out of being railroady or having very strictly planned moments ahead of time in the first place. So you can either bake a twist into the session itself. I like to think about each session of D&D kind of like an episode of a TV show. So if you bake a twist into the setup of the session, this person isn't who they seem to be, this is an illusion, that's a trick, this person means something different. You can reveal it later as long as you're consistent for all of one session about it. And you don't want to plan too much further out than that. You don't want to plan out a twist that's going to happen after like dozens and dozens of sessions. Things will get too lost in translation as you go. So really plan out one session one likely twist that can happen, and maybe let your players discover it on their own. Don't try to jump it on them. Let them kind of stumble across something that they didn't expect with the setup for the session. Pungai Fungi responded to a comment that someone made about the Planescape module we had on the shelf in the background. And he correctly pointed out that this is a terrible module for everything we were talking about in the episode itself. That particular module and a lot of the Planescape modules are incredibly railroady, and it's worse because somebody else has written the session that you're railroading the characters through. If you had written the session specifically tailor-made to follow your characters and give them the most expression as possible, the railroading might not be that bad, but these old 2nd edition Planescape books are really rough for that kind of railroading aspect that's baked into them. Players become more like spectators than and observers than people who are actually influencing the outcome of the session, and it becomes just basically unplayable. It's kind of a good example if you want to look at everything not to do with a campaign module. That being said, 5th edition is much better about this, and Planescape is still a rich and detailed setting. Even though the 2nd edition modules and the 3rd edition modules maybe aren't the best place to look for an actual adventure to play. Some guy, great name, asks if QuickTime events are a thing. Okay, no, the answer to this is no, D&D is not a video game. Obviously, QuickTime events are not a thing. But it does raise an interesting question. What if you have a timed thing in your game that forces your characters to do a thing in a certain amount of time? This is a thing that existed in 1st edition, which you can find it like a kind of living example if you find an updated version of the Tomb of Horrors, which asks your players to do a thing in a certain amount of time before an event happens. And that's super, super fun, but you have to act it up at the table. You have to have a sort of ticking clock shouting at everyone, bomb's about to go off, roof is about to collapse mentality with the whole thing. Really make the act up the stakes, raise the stakes, and make them feel real for a little bit. You have to get into the acting to make a timed consequence. Timed at the table, not timed in the game time, but timed for the players to figure stuff out. To make that reasonable and immediate for everybody. And if you can make that happen, it's so fun. You should absolutely try to find a way to put a 1-minute timer or a 5-minute timer on deciding the action to a thing. Let your players know that there's a timer and then play it up. It'll be great. The Pyro Gamer says, what are your thoughts on Pathfinder? Oh my god, so many thoughts. I played Pathfinder before I did 3.5, and I played 3.5 for years before I played 5th edition, and we've dabbled a little bit in Starfinder, which is the new Pathfinder kind of sci-fi system, and I have so many thoughts. Ultimately, Pathfinder is just a different system. It's got different quirks, different kind of design philosophies that it follows. 5th edition is super streamlined. If it's your first role-playing game, your first D&D type of game, 5th edition is the place you want to be. If you're super familiar with 3.5 and like building your character with tons and tons of little features that you get to select off of a list, that is what Pathfinder is designed for. Pathfinder's also got way more third-party content, so if you want to have a wealth of things to draw from, Pathfinder and Starfinder are the places to go. John Walker II provides 7 rules for DMing that he tries to follow in the comments, and we'll post them right here because they're really, really good. I don't have much to say about them other than read them in your own time. For the most part, they're really on point, and we'll do a video with just guidelines for new DMs. Because short of avoiding railroading and, figuring out what type of DM you are and working with your players for that, having a sort of guidelines like this is a really, really solid way of getting your campaign up and running. Charlie Awesome, whom seems very excited about his own name, asks, can we do a video about D&D science fiction rather than D&D fantasy? And eventually, yes. We're going to do an entire series on this when our campaign setting, Dark Matter, finally releases. I don't want to make this an advertisement for Dark Matter, but suffice it to say, we built an entire campaign setting updating the core 5th edition rules for a sci-fi mentality, a sci-fi rule set, and a sci-fi setting. So we've given this a lot of thought. We like what Starfinder's done, but it doesn't, have the simplicity that 5th edition natively has. So we're kind of building this entire setting around it. I think sci-fi is super rich and gives you a ton of options to play with that you wouldn't get in traditional fantasy. And really expands the scope of what is possible. So I think if you haven't done a sci-fi setting yet, and you've kind of dabbled with the ideas that have been presented in sci-fi, I can't think of a DM who hasn't, you should really look into dark matter or another science fiction setting, and play with it a little bit to see if it works at your table. You'd be surprised. These types of settings are some of the best you can get your fingers into, simply because of all the options that you have available to you, and the rich wealth of resources you can draw upon, from Star Wars to Dune to Firefly to whatever. And that's all we got this time. Remember to comment and leave your thoughts below if you want to see your comment in next episode's Mailbag of Holding. We look forward to seeing to what you have to say about this episode. Thanks for watching!
If you like D&D and wish there was more out there for 5th edition, consider checking out our blog, Middle Finger of Vecna, and our Patreon, where you can support this show and get tons of content for 5th edition.
Also, several Thieves Guild members have broken in here and demanded that you like, comment, and subscribe, or else.
I don't know what that means, but I don't want to find out.
Neither do I.
And that's a wrap.
That's a show.
So we're just like usual. We're sitting up here. The card's gonna come up.
What they don't know is that we never actually leave these seats.
Yeah.
We just, the lights go down and we just stay here.
There was an incident with some glue, and no one's been able to come in here to unstick us. I'm really hungry.
Please send help.